Okay, welcome everyone to this session. I'm Carolyn Giardino with The Hollywood Reporter, and we've got an hour, so I'm going to jump in pretty quickly and introduce everybody. And then I just have one housekeeping item. David Levitt, who is on the program, is unable to join us today. So we have Christina Heller, co-founder of VR Playhouse. And Christina, could you just maybe spend a minute or so talking a little bit about what your company is doing?
Sure. VR Playhouse is a creative studio and full-service production company that specializes in the things that fall in that XR umbrella. So that's VR, AR, and now MR. We've worked on a variety of type of projects over the past 3 years. I think we're up to 60. They've fallen into a lot of different verticals, use cases. And so what's been very cool is I believe that when you're in the content sector at a serious level inside VR, you have this unique perspective where it all comes together. It's where hardware meets software, meets platform, meets financing, meets distribution, meets, market adoption. And so we've just had this really interesting sort of view from the ground floor of, where this industry is and all of the potential and promise that it has to grow from here.
Next we have, one switch from Skydance Interactive. We have Skydance Interactive's president, Peter Ackerman. Peter, do you want to spend a minute or so talking about your company?
Sure, just a moment. So, thank you for the introduction. We are Skydance Interactive. We're a division of Skydance Media that was formed a year and a half ago to go into the VR market. Skydance, of course, you're probably familiar with, has been in film and television for some years and had been always interested in getting into the interactive market. And by interactive market, we mean the gaming market, to be perfectly clear. Saw the advent of motion-controlled VR and high-end console-grade VR as the point where VR had reached a threshold where it was clearly a strong enough platform that we were going to be able to develop games on there that could command the attention of console and PC game players. We were, at the time, an independent company called The Workshop, been doing console development in LA for the previous 7 years, and we merged to form Skydance Interactive with a goal to produce sort of the next gen of sort of serious gaming content for high-end VR on the assumption that that was going to catch on and grow. A year and a half later, in July, we shipped our first game, a game called Archangel, sort of a quintessential giant mech game. That's a really exciting big-ticket action game that was as big, as AAA as you could get for VR and realism of VR budgets, but embodied sort of the values, the sort of cinematic big-ticket entertainment values that Skydance is always known for. And that's an area we're going to continue to double down on, investing in our world building, our narrative, and sort of all the cinematic strengths that the Skydance DNA brings. It's been announced that we're now working on a Walking Dead VR game, which is incredibly exciting. No date or very little said about that yet, but I'll tease what I can. As well as some other VR initiatives moving forward from what we achieved with Archangel, and just a great time to be in the business as we're watching it grow.
Okay. Next we have Peter Martin, founder and CEO of Valis Studios. Peter?
Hi. So without realizing it, I've been making VR since 2001. I actually made a volumetric capture rig for an Alexander McQueen fashion show in 2001, and we made volumetric models and released that in VRML. So without really realizing we were doing VR at that point, I've been obsessed with this notion of virtualizing talent and building interactive, immersive spaces. So throughout my career, I've kind of dipped in and out of that. Since then, we actually developed the show Black Mirror. When I was running a comedy company called Zeppotron with Charlie Brooker, and I worked with the Gorillas for a long time, so we also learned how to virtualize them, being a virtual band. So I'm coming at this from a very different angle. I have made 360 video and gone through that whole process, but my focus is really on kind of building people and bringing AI-driven characters into the virtual space. Right now we're working mainly with location-based VR platforms like IMAX, Dreamscape, and a new Paul Allen platform that actually doesn't use a headset.
Okay. Next we have Patrick Meighan, who is the creative director at Jaunt Studios. Patrick.
Hi. So many of you may know Jaunt, and you probably know us for the camera that we built a couple years ago to capture stereoscopic spherical video. But these days we're really focused on content creation of all kinds, always with a storytelling emphasis. So at the studio we have an office in Palo Alto where we focus on distribution and building an SDK to allow people to embed VR experiences in their own applications, et cetera. And down here in LA at our studio, we focus on working with brands and other partners and platforms to develop story-driven content. In the last year, we've been developing a lot more interactive content, both in 360 video, adding elements of interactivity, and also we've been working on 6 Degree of Freedom experiences now as well. I will mention we've won our first Emmy last week for a great piece we did with artist Lynette Walworth, which was about kind of what I felt was one of the great projects I got to work on, telling the story of an Aboriginal man in Australia and his first encounter with the Western world in the form of an atomic bomb test. But it was great to kind of see a powerful piece of VR storytelling get some recognition, so that was very exciting. But yeah.
Okay. And Jeff Nicholas, who is Director of VR Creative and Production for Live Nation Studios.
Yeah, so Live Nation, you may or may not know, is the largest concert promoter in the world. We promote 25,000 shows and 80 festivals year-round, actually closer to 29,000 shows at this point. We also manage about 200 plus artists. In my division over in the VR and sort of immersive side, we're exploring multiple ways of engaging with fans and connecting fans to artists. We're really all about the amplification of that connection between artist and fan. So on the VR side, we've got a number of different programs that are running right now, one with Next VR, where we just recently did the Global Citizens Festival, along with about, I think, 10, maybe it has been 15 shows this year, and we'll do hundreds with them over the next couple of years. We also have a series with Hulu called On Stage, where we featured Lil Wayne in the first episode, Major Lazer in the second episode. We're in post on the third and in pre-production on the fourth now. We just did the largest VR live stream with Coldplay and Samsung. That was part of their Live Pass program. That happened a couple months ago now, and 17 cameras VR live stream. It was pretty insane. So we're really just about, up till this point, it's been exploring VR and ways to connect fans and artists. We're also now diving into AR and other, XR, 6 Degrees of Freedom, you name it, to try to figure out how we might be able to connect some of those dots.
Okay. And we have Kimber Lin, who is Chief Creative Officer and Head of Studio at Holler.
So Holler, we were, all about pushing a wider adoption of this type of content. And now I'm categorizing content, as we all say, AR, VR, MR, XR, 3 degrees, 6 degrees, like content is content. And we are started with 360 video. Definitely same, we've moved into interactive 360. We just launched Transformers 5 app on the iOS and Android as a collaboration with Paramount and Walmart. So we've been really kind of tying in with partners and brands like Samsung and Best Buy, and we're doing something with Monster to really create content that people are going to be interested in watching and being engaged in, and the interactivity is a large part of that. Regardless of what format you're working in, whether it's live streaming, AR, VR, all that. So, but for us, our focus in that kind of spreading that, wider adoption idea is focusing on mobile. Things, the idea that we carry our cell phones around with us everywhere we go, being able to have just fun, social, snackable content that you can deliver, that you can engage in, really trying to widen and penetrate that market.
Okay. So for any new and emerging market, there's obviously a combination of factors that need to happen in order for it to really take off. And in the case of VR and AR, two of them are certainly a quantifiable audience and a steady stream of quality content. So those are two areas we're going to talk about this afternoon. Starting with quantifiable audience, there's kind of two pieces to this. One is headsets for the home, and then there's location-based. So starting with the home, this morning we heard Oculus announce another $199 headset for a kind of mid-range price. So why don't we start with, when we're talking about headsets, how important is it to have more headsets at more price points, and how important is that to the rollout, and what other things are needed in order to have larger penetration in the home?
I think it's very, very important because a lot of the initiatives that, the professionals in this industry are conceiving require activations. And whenever you get to the part about activation, particularly if it's an interactive experience, or something that you're trying to do at a place like a hospital, there's always the question of headsets and how you can actually activate it in a way that doesn't require a computer and something very expensive. So again, assuming the quality level and the UX UI on the standalone headset is good, I think that's really, really exciting news.
I'm really bullish on the standalone headset. I think up until this point, you've had a couple of barriers to the consumer. One is you're either tethered and you have a big expense, and by tethered, I mean tethered to a computer by wires, which really inhibit your ability to move around, and also, as I said, the expense to that. Or you have to have a specific mobile device that will work with the headset that you're trying to use. And then it's clunky. You have to click it in. You've got to navigate to the right thing. It's just not necessarily the best experience. So a purpose-built headset that costs $199 that I can have, just sitting there charging, and I pick it up and put it on, and I'm immediately in VR, and I can immediately engage with content. I think it's a game changer for how the consumer will be able to, engage with VR on a global scale.
I mean, you could buy 20 of them for $2,000.
Right.
That's exciting.
And I mean, even now, like if you think about the Samsung Gear VR, you can buy it for $99, but
20,000.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was like, fuck.
That's less exciting.
Sorry,
It was a lot. It's still
still-
the
it's
point
still
is,
ridiculous.
point is
Yeah.
this is like a 5 times lower entry point than there's ever been
Yeah.
for VR.
Yeah, totally.
That's
And
massive.
when you think about how new all this technology is on the consumer side, it's not new to people who have been in the industry for a long time, but you're talking CRT monitors strapped to your head, back in the day. But when you come to the consumer side of it, it's relatively new, and what you're talking about is we're used to having this in our pocket that can control our entire life. And now all of a sudden you told me I had to buy something that plugged into my computer in order to have the best experience. That's like beta, for the consumer right now. So as things get better, the headsets get cheaper, the quality gets higher, the consumer's going to go, yeah, of course I have to have that.
Please no one quote me on that math, please.
I think Kimber had a point too.
And we're definitely at the point where, we're constantly going to see this evolution, right? In terms of the technology, and everything's going to get better and faster and cheaper, which is great because the entire user experience, we want to make it easy for them. Like, we can't make it any harder than it is right now in order for them to look at content and be engaged and be inspired and be, so that we have an audience that we can be making content for. We're just right now throwing things up against the wall and seeing what sticks, but as we try to, lower that entry on the tech side, especially for the general audience and the general users, I think that will create a lot more excitement and a lot more things for us to be able to do, even outside of just entertainment.
When you look at a company like Facebook who says today they want 1 billion people in VR,
Yes, me
and a company but a company that's that large and has that much investment power, I mean, that's a really great sign for where this is all going.
And if it's social, which is, then it really is a game changer. If you can buy a headset if you can do high-end virtual reality for $200 and it has social, engagement in it, I think then this is something that we'll, I think, really see the impact of next year. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that social component. What capabilities do you think need to be in the headsets, and where are we right now?
Well, it doesn't seem like there's much of a platform yet for people to be able to share this type of content. And I think, really working on, and it's one of the things that we're also testing at Holler to expand on in terms of the tool sets and the ways to be able to share this stuff, right? Whether right now, even on a very basic level, through being able to say, hey, I looked at this, hey, check it out, because right now there isn't an easy way to do that. And if you can tie that into all the other social platforms, then now you're opening it up to not just the people who are the early adopters or who's just starting in this stuff, but to now be able to share to, all of my friends and family who may not be tech savvy and but that there's really cool stuff out there for them to look at.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what you're actually testing right now?
It really is just social sharing in so many different ways, and there are some things that we're up against in terms of being able to post, on Facebook through, the way that you shoot, whether it's the way that you capture the camera technologies that are out there that's easily able to share on Facebook and on YouTube and be able to upload in an easier way.
And I think, it's interesting that since this kind of wave of VR started, people have been talking about it, I think often from the outside, as this very antisocial activity. When in fact, because it has been sort of almost a computer hobbyist's consumer market right now, or up until now, it actually is usually a very social experience. You're often trying it at an event, or you're trying it with a friend who's, urging you to try something. I know we've done a number of group screenings that are really interesting, of just having, anywhere from a dozen to 100 people in a room watching a synchronized, VR experience together. And because it is, even a 360 video, I would argue, is inherently interactive. I think, if this was even 6 years ago, if you had a 360 video on your computer you had to drag around, that would be interactive media. And now, because it's linear, and VR has so many other interactive possibilities, we kind of forget that all of it's interactive. So, with the cheaper headsets, but then, empowering, I get really what I think probably a lot of us get into the space is that we're able to empower our audience in ways that we haven't been able to do with sort of flat 2D media. Obviously, video games have like a lot of that, but I think, this is it just takes this even further. And I think for people coming more from maybe the film background, it is sort of an exciting new capability. So I think, the medium wants to be social and shared, and it kind of has been, but I think often our imaginations of what VR will be are so far kind of ahead of where the tech actually is. But it's incredible how fast it is moving. In a year, next year we'll have the standalone headset with controllers and touching things, and we'll, be kind of shaking each other's hands from across the world, I think, pretty soon.
And Peter, where are we in augmented reality technology?
I mean, which one?
Martin.
The closer one.
Was the closer one. So I think, the release of AR Kit and AR Core, most recently through Google, is going to give us the adoption that we don't have in VR right now. I mean, we're talking about, potentially 400, 500 million people next year, where we're never going to get to that number in VR, even with the advent of these new headsets. So I think audience is huge for this, because if you're releasing a piece of content, there has to be a sustainable model for that. In film, you'd need to release a film on 1,000 screens. In VR, that's probably 100 million headsets. We don't have those right now. We have probably 20 million across everything, including cardboard. So I think having that audience is going to massively accelerate, because then you're going to have hits. You're going to actually have successful titles that are generating revenue. And a lot of these things can operate across platforms. I mean, that's where I'm focusing. I'm building content that can work in AR, VR, live holographic. It's the same thing to me. So I think that's really going to be a catalyst.
One of the things that Peter and I have spoken about is this whole idea of content and assets being used across multiple formats. And I think it's sort of the holy grail, right? If you have an asset that can be seen across film, TV, mobile, all these different areas, and you can engage a user and they can sort of naturally follow that thread and engage with all that content across all these different devices and media types. In VR and AR, we have an immediate ability to do that, where all of a sudden I find something in my space in AR, and now I want to have more of a closed experience or more of an immersive experience than it being in the transparent layer in my world. And now I'm in VR, and then I share that off to somebody, and they're able to experience it in 360 video. And all of a sudden, all of these assets are working together, and you're using that 400 million handsets or to drive awareness over to the 20 million headsets. And it just sort of creates this flywheel that helps serve all of it.
Patrick, you've been nodding. Do you want to add to?
No, it's always, I think for those of us who've been doing this for a while, this kind of AR, VR divide we realize is immaterial, and it's this singular gradient. Like I read I forget who wrote it, but an article like, let's just call it all VR. At a certain point, we'll just, there's a virtual element to our reality that we kind of slide in and out of degrees of kind of opacity. But I think it's exactly right that I think we're all kind of thinking of content, and we need a better word maybe than transmedia, but in that sort of transmedia
Immersive media is a great catch-all, and I like that as a term. And the only issue with building a transmedia experience for one piece of IP is you risk maybe not utilizing each aspect or application of it in its fullest form or in the smartest way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, like, for example, like a 360 video companion piece to a narrative film is a really cool piece of content that you can be packaging in, and you just need to make sure that when you're producing that 360 video that you're thinking about what 360 video does well, and that's immersive and that's about presence. So maybe that 360 video companion piece is a 1 minute in a room with one of the main characters of the film, and it's just that, and as a piece of VR, it's interesting in and of itself, and as a companion, it adds a greater element to the rest of your stories.
And then you take volumetric capture of one of those characters, and all of a sudden they're playing on your table because it's part of ARKit, and you start to create a storyline that expands well beyond what even those sort of linear formats.
And you're creating a time capsule of the actor too, which is just really cool.
Yeah.
I just want to pick up on that. Sorry, go ahead.
What I kind of thirst for though is also, I think a lot of the work we do and that's paid for at this point is, marketing pieces and work companions, and that, which is fine so long as it's truly telling a narrative as well. I guess what I'm hoping to see more and more of is where let's say it's a companion piece to a TV show, but it's truly expanding the narrative in a way that you can't access in any other way. It's not kind of just getting you access to a star, but also kind of really building out a more complicated and fleshed out world of story. So, which I think we're all after.
Which actually I think is a great segue to Archangel, because
yeah,
Archangel
sure.
was that,
Yeah, I mean, we're, up at the sort of the market we're after, this high-end gaming market, the transmedia dreams are ways out because there's so much that has to be kind of like software that has to be developed. Like, I feel like the hardware platform is there in high-end VR set and interactive control with your hands, but there's generations worth of software that's going to have to get developed before you're going to seriously compete for the gaming audience, which is, like I said, that's what the high-end entertainment people are after. It's a hardcore audience. They're into their stuff, but they're dedicated people. They play a lot. They pay a lot for the content that they're after. So for us, it's not as much thinking about those kind of breadth, but stability in what we really need, I'll tell you broadly, is a stability in that platform. It's like enough standardization and cheaper, of course. I do think the lower end sets are great. Not that they don't contribute directly to our audience, but anything that gets people to put the damn thing on and see that this is transformative. Recognize that there's something there that's not just goofy and weird, but like getting over that social hump.
I just want to pick up
I
on
think
something
it's definitely helped winning the war. So
one thing
that Patrick said, which was you said you thought that that someone said that everything should just be called VR. I'm curious, do all of you agree with that point?
I don't quite. I feel like the uses of AR and VR are there's underlying technology incredibly shared, but what's going to be great in both of those cases, I think, could be just polar opposite in terms of what's going to where the real killer.
I like the catch-all of either immersive or mixed reality, because it is in some way you're mixing something with reality. So it's a good one. But immersive content.
I mean, there's stuff being in the real world is amazing. Stuff being completely synthetic is amazing too, and they're both awesome. I think they're incredible things that can be done in both spaces. But
so we're going to move on to
think broadly.
Go ahead.
Well, I think I think it matters, from a tech standpoint, right? In terms of like the developers and the people who are actually trying to really focus on that particular type of technology that they're creating. But from a user standpoint, they don't care. Right. Like they don't necessarily. I don't even think that most people know that Snapchat filters is an AR thing. They just think it's a fun thing that they play with, and and they just see it as that. I don't think anybody, my kids would say, "Oh, hey, Mom, that's AR." So I think from a content generating standpoint, if you're really talking about stories and things that are going out for brands or for advertisers or for cinema, immersive content seems to be a very great term to go with, or immersive media, anything that's outside of gaming, which is very specific.
I'll caveat it's more of an aspiration that way it all sort of converges. And I think, though, to your point, Peter, it's right now, I think it has to do with like the technology platforms and things that sort of do create a lot of the demarcations. But and I couldn't agree with you more about just this having stability, which I don't think we're ever going to get. Is the thing. I think
stop inventing new weird stuff.
Every time you would get stable with a current format, it's going to evolve to the next format, and we're going to. I think part of the project of working in this space is constantly adapting, at least for another decade or so.
So I think you can get certain principles, like look at the evolution of game controllers. They're not really that different than they have been for 20 years. And it was like getting the notion of that form factor and that use case of a game controller has the buttons and the configuration. You can evolve the comfort. You can involve more, getting more buttons there. And there's lots of sort of incremental evolutions, but you need to stabilize the idea that you're going to sit there on a couch and define the use case fundamentally. If in the VR fundamental use cases, I'm able to sit there in my living room and plug in like this, and it's going to just work. And then, improvements that make it more comfortable, get the screen to a higher resolution, get the cord out eventually somehow, improve the tracking, every other thing. Those are all wins, but you've got this core of like something you can develop software to.
Well, okay, we need to move on to location in the interest of time, and I know a lot of you wanted to talk about location. So why don't we start with IMAX? Skydance Interactive already has been producing content. What has your experience been thus far?
Well, it's embryonic. We've been in IMAX for a week in the first center. We're not even getting very much direct feedback on it. That we work pretty closely with those guys on developing our content. I say the big deal is we took our consumer product, Archangel, and we developed a location-specific version of it, kind of Archangel Arcade, because the use case is different. Somebody who buys a game at home, they're looking to dig in. I'll sit through a 15-minute tutorial. I want a rich narrative experience. I'm willing to have it be hard and kick my butt and die 20 times and win the 21st and feel like a champion. Very different from when I show up in the arcade. I paid my $10 and I want my thrill ride. So we sort of made an arcade adaptation of our game that's in the world and using all the assets of our game. The vibe, the spirit of it, but is designed for that use case. I think that was extremely attractive to the vendors, the people, to IMAX, and to many others who are interested in that case. So the purpose-built content, both from a standpoint of fitting the use case of that they're trying to get people through that experience. They want you in 10 minutes, out in 12. Gone next person in the rig. They also find it very attractive that we're giving them something that people can't just go download on Steam, and so that it's actually a reason to come there, even if you have the stuff at home. And so I think that's so far looking like a very promising thing to have taken a bet on. And those are like little blossom. They're all buds really, but there's like a lot of them.
Do you have any numbers at this point of how many people have used the systems?
The number of people who have actually done it, consumers who have experienced that thing and paid money to do so. I certainly can't tell you a number. It is not large. It hasn't been out there for very long, but we're very bullish on the future of it. I can tell you that.
Oh, I just wanted to also point out that this was what you were talking about, but Archangel is in some ways a unicorn in this space that we should all be aspiring to make more of. It was a project that had funding that was supported by a big company that, and we had the opportunity to help with.
We
we
both worked
we
on
worked
it.
on it. We worked on it with them, but what was really cool was right from the very first conversations with Skydance, they were interested in story first, like making this not just a VR shoot 'em up, but something that had a narrative element and use some of the unique properties of VR storytelling. So I just wanted to point that out because Peter had mentioned it, but I feel like Archangel should be something that we look to as an industry and something that we hold up as a really valiant effort and what we should be all kind of hoping we can see more of made.
On the Live Nation side, it's kind of interesting, location-based for us. It ends up being, or it has the potential to be an expansion of what we already do. Nothing's ever going to overtake the live music experience. You're not going to put on a headset and be like, holy shit, that was so much better than going to the show and actually feeling the energy of the people and feeling what's coming off the stage. However, we can give you a great experience at home, but you would have an even better experience in a location with other people who are also experiencing that virtual world. And all of a sudden, we start to expand the reach of not only that show or that festival around the world in a way that is actually probably monetizable at a certain point as well. So it's a very, and then on the other side of it is holographic, and you know what Peter's doing, where you start to say, okay, there's something happening. Now all of a sudden, let's pull that into a space in a holographic format that people don't have to put on a headset, and they can be there as if they're at a show and be experiencing the same thing that someone in China is experiencing.
I think it's just the location-based stuff is where you get to do the highest end of the current technology. So you can have additional haptic feedback or, larger volumes to walk through, actual mixed reality, physical objects that are digitally mapped to the space to interact with, like in things like the Void and Dreamscape. So, I think that's at the very highest end, and then it kind of goes down to consumer VR, and then it goes down to mobile VR and AR on your phone. But and I think we all kind of, as you develop stories or creative projects, I think it's usually fruitful to kind of think of how it could play across all, or how it kind of, lives in each of those iterations.
What is everyone's thoughts about things like what, the Void and Dreamscape are doing? How important is that to rolling out this market?
Huge. That, and also practical applications in enterprise and business. Yeah. I mean, how many computers were brought into business places before they were adopted on a wide scale by people in their homes? I talk about VR. It's many things, but it's also a tool. What can this tool do better that a tool before it wasn't capable of doing? And starting to really think about the areas and industries that have a really practical need for this tool, and where they could see a cost reduction. So like a good example is, I found out in the medical industry, they spend $500,000 a year on training using 3D printed bodies, and it's very time intensive and it's expensive. For $500,000, they could do a training simulation in a virtual headset that they could move people through really fast, and they could use year in, year out. So that's a really great practical application that will save hospitals money. So I think hospitals and location-based are the things that, and gaming on like PSVR and those consoles are going to be the things that like start to move the industry forward. And then, of course, making cooler experiences that we can access on our mobile phones will be another part of it. And then hopefully it'll.
I got to throw in. Sorry, since you just mentioned the gaming thing on the tool front, and I know this is just a teeny little tidbit, but I thought it was so sweet. How many of you are familiar with Medium? Oculus's Medium. More of you should check it out. It's amazing. It's this sort of three-dimensional modeling goop that lets you build stuff in virtual reality. I always thought it was kind of a novelty until I realized that our own artists for our next generation work are starting to model things. When you're building something for a virtual space, getting to be able to do it in the virtual space, like a thing that's designed to be around the player and being able to do it from entirely within, we're conceiving of spaces that, talking about professional artists who use mouse keyboard all day, are choosing to get out of that and get into the VR helm to be able to come up with stuff that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I'd never thought it was going to crest into like a serious tool for these guys, because it's not a game for them. This is their day job, right? So just being able to use it for spatial visualization, the fact that it's crested to the point that that's actually practical, even though they go and they put better polygons on it later and other things, I thought that was kind of there's a threshold moment there. that's just a toe in the door, but I think something's coming.
When you think about the difference between novelty and a tool that you actually integrate into your life, and you think about how the computer evolved or how the mobile device evolved, when you first put a computer in your home, for those of you who are old enough, you brought in the whatever it was, the Tandy or the IBM, and it was there as a word processor. And then you might have realized, oh, there's a game that I could play on this. And then the web launched, and all of a sudden, fucking explosion, right? The phone was a phone. It allowed you to make a phone call. And when the iPhone launched, you could do a few other things, but it wasn't the app store that we have now. It was a functional tool that we really, it became part of our lives. So if it's entertainment first, it ends up being novelty, but if it's tool first, that's where it starts to become part of our existence. And I think AR has the first ability to do that and then backs us into VR.
Although on that front, it's worth mentioning, I don't know how much people are aware of the Microsoft headsets that are coming out, but I think that's just interesting because it's all, it's the Lenovo's, the Samsung, all the folks that make different PCs are making headsets on a spec for Microsoft. And actually Windows 10 is fully functional in VR. So I think, I think it's happening on both fronts, and it's moving quicker than I think. I guess I didn't expect to see just full Windows in VR this year, and it is there.
Okay, we're going to shift over to content, which was the other piece that we wanted to talk about today. I think a lot of you know where the content is right now. We're certainly seeing games, we're seeing training, medical. You've all mentioned quite a bit of already. But what I was hoping maybe we could do is, Kimber, why don't we start with you and then work our way up. But if each of you would describe one piece of content that you could be one you made, could be one you tried from somebody else, but that you thought really represented a step forward. I mean, let's look at the things that are kind of really changing the business and leading the way.
Actually, you go first.
No,
Jeff.
I wasn't going to go. I took a deep breath. I was just thinking that I hate that question because there's so much good content and there's so much bad content.
There is a lot. There's a lot out there. I think just speaking of what Peter's doing over at Skydance, but the type of content out there, because it's so vast and wide, especially in this field now, because it's started to penetrate into every industry, whether it's training or games or health or medical or so in terms of what was actually out there, well, let me just start with one thing that I really was excited about. League of Legends and AR, but it's there's a lot out there. I can't specify.
Yeah, it's funny. Like that question, maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, you could point to very specific pieces of content. At least I could, that were moving the needle forward. Now I feel like it has expanded in such a way that there's a lot of people doing a lot of great things that are pushing different aspects of both AR and VR forward in really interesting ways, too many to name. I will say, generally, what I've been seeing a lot of is people who have purchased a Vive or purchased an Oculus who will say, or even a Samsung Gear or whatever, who will say, I really had a lot of fun with it for the first month or the first couple of weeks, and now it's sort of just sitting there in my drawer because they're not finding content, or they're not finding content sticky enough. So they're playing something and they're having a little bit of fun with it, but then it's like, back to normal life. And so that's a challenge. I think part of it goes back to what you, Christina, was saying about these unicorns of story first, proper funding, focusing on what's important within the medium that you're working in. Those are really, really important in order to make content that people keep coming back to and that people will go and search out. We need more of that. And it's a little chicken and egg, right? Like the funding doesn't come to get those pieces made because the market isn't there. The market isn't there because the funding hasn't come to make the great content. So we're still, that feels a little bit broken record over the past couple of years. But I think everything we're talking about today with the expansion of AR in handset, the new headsets that are coming, both the Microsoft ones and then the standalones, not just from Oculus, but from some of the others, all of that is going to start this new, you can already feel it, it's starting this new engine behind VR funding and this sort of move back into it. So it's a tricky thing though, there's a ton of bad content out there too, and that's also a challenge, because if you watch 3 bad things in a row, you're like, I'm good. I don't need this.
Well, I'll mention a couple, but I'll mention one that we're working on now that I'm quite proud of is a project called Free the Night, and we're kind of putting out a teaser on October 17th, and then the full experience will be available or shipping with the Microsoft headsets later in November. But what I think is kind of special about it is we worked with an artist, Nicole McDonald. And she had this childhood experience of growing up in a small Massachusetts town, watching the night sky with her father and the sort of annual meteor showers. And then as sort of malls and strip malls and other, commerce was built, the ambient light drowned out the night sky. And so this medium allows her to kind of live out a fantasy where you're a giant in this landscape and you can pick up the streetlights and sort of blow them out like dandelions, and then the embers of the streetlights go up into the sky, and you can interact with the Milky Way. And it's just kind of, it's narrative but very experiential, and it's just, I think, nice that I think for many of us, it's like, oh, we can now actually materialize our childhood fantasies, which I think was just kind of beautiful. The other one on a totally different side that I really like is this game called To the Top. Has anyone played To the Top? It's, moving in large spaces is really difficult right now in VR, like to traverse landscapes. So Crytek, who has their own engine, had done this rock climbing game that was pretty cool. And then this one, you use your hands and like sort of throw yourself through these giant jungle gyms, and you're flying through the air. And it was the first time recently where I had those VR moments where I was like suddenly screaming because I was falling off like a cliff somewhere. So I just want to shout those guys out because it's just super fun.
Okay, Peter Martin.
So one project I'm working on right now that's opened up a whole new sort of territory for me is we just virtualized the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So that has actually led into a whole education initiative, and we're looking at a big history series now where we're actually virtualizing in a volumetric, 6DoF experience, not a kind of 2D asset in a 3D space. But we're looking at everything from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech to the Civil War. So that, I think, is a really interesting space, and we have some good, solid partners in that who are already in the US embedded in the education system. So they're in the curriculum. So the problem is getting that to kids. So I think right now location-based will probably be the entry level for that, but hopefully that will kind of bleed into the classroom at some point. In terms of something I'm really looking forward to seeing, I saw the trailer for it this morning, is the Void Star Wars experience. Looks awesome. So that looks, and just on that, actually, all of the film tie-ins that are happening right now, I think, are missing the trick. I think these guys have got it right. It looks like the film. Everyone else's VR experiences don't look anything like the film. They look like a Saturday morning kids cartoon, or they're just bullshit. So I think the idea that the ILMX labs have kind of developed it in tandem with the movie is really critical to these experiences.
I had as I'm sure many of us had, a real amazing aha moment when I did the Google Earth VR experience in the Vive. And VR Playhouse is lucky enough to be in the early developers program of people who can build on that API and start doing things like, for example, flood risk data, and being able to use Google Earth to incorporate that in a visual way and do data visualizations using the actual globe. So that's really cool. And getting back to that math earlier, so 10 headsets at $200, that's $2,000, right? So 20 headsets at $200 is $4,000. That's something that a classroom could afford. And that's what I'm excited about, like virtual field trips, things like you're an educational initiative, like that $200 headset means that we can start to see a realistic integration for big groups where they can do it together. And then if it does go on the shelf for a month, it's not something they're kicking themselves about or beating themselves up over. It's $200. And then one thing an experience we had at VR Playhouse that was really memorable was we were in Kenya and we had our GoPro Odyssey camera, and we put the camera, we had our guide looking at some elephants in the distance, and we had our guide made a guess as to where they would walk. And so we left our Odyssey in the middle of the field in the Masamara. And lucky enough, the elephants did walk the path that the guide said that it would walk. And we're watching with binoculars from really far away. And wouldn't you know, but they turn around, they check out the camera, and as a group, babies and all, come back and encircle the camera. And we have this amazing 7-minute experience from beginning to end that has elephants in the wild interacting with this inanimate object. If that was you, you'd be in an incredible amount of danger. And I thought when we afterwards and when I revisited, I'm like, this is 360 content. You can't capture this experience on a frame. And so, again, that's part of our challenge as an industry, is to decide what makes something truly thrilling in 360 or in VR versus something that could be, frankly, told a lot better in a high-res framed experience. But yeah, at Archangel, it's awesome.
The elephants thing, can't beat that. That's extremely cool. Well, for me, everything I see that comes swinging to chip away at the gamer's attention and to validate the space that I've seen over the last year. Some notable moments, I would say. I got to give a shout. Obviously, I hope that Archangel itself, I'm going to put that up front and last, is that we've done something, we took a big bet that very few people would have taken to kind of put a serious game out there. And I think delivered a game that wrapped up, good, great action gameplay, a game that, as you said, doesn't look like a kid's cartoon. It doesn't look like a movie because it isn't a movie. It's purpose-built for VR. It's like we take it so darn seriously. It's not just adapting anything to that. So I think that was, I'm hoping that was a big validating bet for people. I loved Resident Evil's adaptation to VR. If anybody got to go and get that, if you could take it. For me, it was, though there's a little bit of nausea, it wasn't perfect, but it was like the of finding yourself in the Resident Evil world was just fantastic. I loved seeing a big ticket bet like that, where they took it, they didn't just spin off a little sub-team and make a junky little adaptation of their stuff. They took it seriously. I know what Bethesda's coming in with. They're taking it seriously. I mean, Bethesda, of course, has been in VR from early on. That Carmack was working there before it was working anywhere else, so some of the pioneers of the field were there. But so I am very happy to see Doom showing up and to work with Fallout and Skyrim, and even in things like Oculus's bets, like with Epic Robo Recall, goofy as that may seem, validates this crazily interactive kind of wild gameplay that's just so VR. Nothing in regular gameplay is anything like that. Lone Echo, another really nice thing that attacks the nav problem from a creative way, where you're yanking yourself in space through a spaceship. I mean, it's not general purpose yet, but things that give you that navigational freedom where it works and you're not sick. Achilles heel, of course, nausea, still Achilles heel of the whole platform. But whenever they beat that, chip away at that problem, they're all validating. They're all huge moves, and I just can't, I know with the amount of force that's coming, like the next 6 months, I expect to be transformative. So.
Since this is still a young market, how many views do you have to have for a project to be considered, a success? Like,
I think if you're counting on views, you're looking at the wrong metric.
What was that?
If you're counting views, you're looking at the wrong metric.
Well, how would you quantify?
Well, but there is if you can do the full VR experience and then also do maybe something for 360. I think that allows commercial, brands and other folks to kind of get into the space with more justified. Because we did a piece a while back that got millions of views for Zoolander on Facebook 360. So I think I wouldn't rely on views on the high-end headsets, but I think if you're able to kind of do a baked down version for 360, at least you can tick that box and you can get significant views.
Or you do a framed, docu behind-the-scenes experience or a mixed reality trailer of your VR experience that can reach people on the platforms they're used to engaging on, which is YouTube and Facebook. We did a companion piece for Defying the Nazis, where we profiled a Holocaust survivor in the Defying the Nazis VR experience, and we show her, we show what she's seeing on the headset. We interview her afterwards. That got 1 billion impressions because it was on Time. Time.com put it up there. So I don't know that a lot of people watched the VR experience, but now Time, our client in this, has begun to dip their toe. Great. So it's not like they need to be knocking it out of the park with these first experiences. They just have to be dipping a toe, learning from what they learning from that experience, it will set the stage for them to be true leaders in the industry as this evolves over the next couple of years. For people who haven't dipped a toe and haven't even done one project, they're going to be way behind those that took these little risks and like built up their content library. And then meantime, doing this cool framed companion piece got them the splash they needed on time.com to make the VR experience, I think, worthwhile.
And it's really, that sort of comes down to earned media. There's a big earned media play here. You can see that. You can see the lift happen there. And I also think duration is a really great metric, at least for us. When we see somebody spending, 30 minutes in an experience, that's a big metric. Or when we look at not even the amount of minutes, but the percentage that they've actually watched through. Is it 2% or is it 75%? Those are the metrics that really seem to matter the most once you sort of parse it all together. It's a big package you can look at something on YouTube and go, they got 1 billion views, right? That was successful. But in this world, there's more metrics that really kind of go into it to measure success.
Okay. So, very broad question, but what is the next disruptor? What is going to disrupt this market again in the next year?
I'm very bullish on live. I think that there's some exciting systems. So we just saw the Nokia Ozo announcement yesterday, but there's a couple new systems that are coming to market, both Live Planet and Candau, which I'm very optimistic about. Live Planet's been kind of quietly building their thing behind the scenes for like 2 years, but it's super user-friendly. So being able to broadcast live moments happening in 360, I think that could be a really interesting game changer next year.
Obviously, I'll echo that.
Live is interesting. I think that, taking that a little bit, one step further is this idea of interactive live streaming. And they're starting to experiment with that just on a 2D standpoint on Facebook, and as well as like live streaming, interactive storytelling and scripted, which is very interesting and bizarrely fun. But being able to kind of introduce that into like a 360, live streaming experience, I think would be really, really interesting and fun to do that, especially in your field too.
I think social too. We've talked about it earlier. I think social is going to blow it open because now all of a sudden it's not that, even though you might be doing it with other people, it's still an isolated experience. So once you can kind of connect with humanity within the experience, I think that is one. And then the other side of it too is sort of the sleeping giant of AR, where right now we're just seeing some really great demos. We're just seeing some really great pieces start to come out with ARKit and ARCore. But what we're going to see next year for people who are purpose building AR apps and AR components, and when it starts to integrate itself into things like maps and messaging, et cetera, that's going to just like blow the doors open on people's experimentation with their reality, I think.
Okay. So we do have to end on time for this live stream, but we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yes, right there. And for the stream, if you could just speak as loud as you can. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks, first of all, for the panel. Very interesting and exciting. I wonder if you could just expand a bit on this building this purpose-driven. Is this more like social conscious purpose-driven, like you do at Global Citizen Development that can be built to the space? Is it experiences that are like functional in the sense that I really need this Google Earth information? You could expand on that.
Yeah, the question about purpose-driven, what I meant when I said that was more a developer who's purpose-building something for AR rather than trying to take something and make an AR component out of an existing thing. So really they're building an app or they're building a piece of content that's specific for AR or that's specific for a number of different platforms similar to games where it's purpose-built to be a game. That was what I meant by that.
Maybe just to answer that question, anyone on the panel, what do you think will be from a content perspective what engages the audience? What kind of stories? I know at CES last year, Anthony was saying, I'm not into maybe change his opinion, but the VR experience will give the audience any place to go to drive the narrative, so it's a different kind of experience to disengage.
Does anyone have a comment?
It's disruptive in the actual storytelling format,
Yeah, I mean, different strokes for different folks, you know? Some people are going to really dig travel applications for this. Some people are going to love first-person shooters. Some people are going to love meditative therapeutic applications. So what I think we really are just striving, you know, our kind of earnest, sincere, small industry is striving to do is create a diversified ecosystem and legitimate marketplace where anyone, you know, we make VR that plays into what this tool does best and taps into a whole bunch of different demographics and markets. But it takes time.
Well, and I also think, you know, when people did, you mentioned medium, but I think tilt brush was this moment for a lot of people where it was, I'm sculpting and drawing with light in, you know, full 3D space, and I can walk around my drawing and my painting. And it was something that you couldn't do in any other format. So it really, I think, you know, like I showed that to my parents, you know, and it's like, look, this is like a totally new thing. And I think that was an aha moment early on. And then I think, you know, from an entertainment standpoint, it's like the most hardcore psychedelic trips we've ever had in our life, maybe, will be the thing.
Android Jones.
Okay. We had another question in the second row. Yes.
You might have answered that. I came in late. So, what do you think is going to make episodic narratives sing in this space? In addition to story crafting, or whatever you want to call storytelling, story crafting, experience design, in your guys' experience, what do you think is really going to make an episodic experience sing?
Well,
Okay,
from my
the question is about episodic experiences for those watching the stream.
Not that I think not to any episodic. It's not so much about episodic experiences, but about narrative experiences in general. I think where VR has the punch that hasn't been entirely delivered is immersing the player's decision making and agency in them in a shocking way. Like VR is the degree to which you are present in virtual reality, and the way your brain even makes decisions and apprehends the things around you is quite different than it is on a screen. And you know, that's like raw material that hasn't been fully utilized yet. And I think we're going to see. I'm expecting the scenario where I'm expecting an explosion, where the VR experience of, oh my God, I wasn't there gaming it or watching it as an audience member. I was just there and I did this and this happened and holy crap, you know, what if I hadn't made that choice? I feel like. Yeah, well, that sort of radical agency that comes from a thing that's connecting at a lower level of your brain, that's not going through the filters of abstraction that normal media goes through, that lets me make almost an instinctive decision, is a term we use from time to time, where you can engage the player and, you know, shock you at what you just encountered and did. This is sort of that's a squishy thing, but I think we're going to see examples that actually embody that, where it's like, hey, it's one of the ones, oh my God, VR did something to me that no other media does or has ever done. And I think those are the kind of, where that marries with narrative, where that shapes a narrative in a way that I was really, really in it. It's going to be one step out of a lucid dream, you know, if we nail it. So.
Gone did a great, it's an older piece, but did a great job of making something episodic that was at the time the most successful thing on the Samsung store, and it's because it was a mystery. It took, every episode led you closer to figuring out the answer of the mystery, and you had to use the 360 space in order to you know, figure out the details and figure out the clues. And they were surprised at Samsung because here this indie VR episodic experience was doing much better than these big splashy celebrity ones, but it was because it, you know, the user was given a goal, and it was really using 360 in a different way that you couldn't do in narrative, or in framed narrative. I also think that it's tough to do because of the body problem. Do I have a body or don't? But I think first-person experiences inside VR headsets are really exhilarating when the actors are looking at you and talking with you. That's like, it feels way more real than if they're doing it on a framed screen. So. Live action certainly makes it a lot more compelling. If a cartoon is talking to me in a VR experience, it's still cool, but it's not. I think, you know, the goals we're trying to get to, all of us as an industry, or yeah, you know, it depends on what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like
how you
like
film people.
Yeah, right. But obviously, we're trying to blend the gaming and live action capture to get the realist blend of human interaction with the agency you get in a video game. But yeah, there's just something about a real person looking you in the eye and talking with you that's, you know, you can get chills, and Anyway.
Okay, we only have a minute left, but I just wanted to check, Patrick, since your company did the VR series Invisible recently, did you have anything you wanted to add on that question?
Well, no, I think it's really, I think that's a great case of kind of a pretty close translation of episodic to the 360 space, and I do think that why we all kind of keep bringing up that agency and interactivity, I think it is, I think that's what the medium is. So I'd say Invisible was super important to do sort of a truly sort of highly produced scripted series. But I also think it just chips away, it sort of puts a flag in the ground, but it really, you kind of watch it and ask for more agency. And so I think, it's a starting point.
And we do have to wrap right now, so I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but hopefully our speakers will stay around for another few minutes, and please join me in thanking them.